A black boy helped a millionaire change a flat tire, asking for nothing in return. The next day, a black SUV appeared in front of his house, and what happened next moved the entire neighborhood. Margaret sat behind the wheel of her SUV, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. The road stretched out in front of her, barren, with tall grass swaying lazily in the warm summer breeze. She checked the time on her wristwatch, muttering under her breath. She was running late to an important charity luncheon, a commitment she valued, but now felt burdensome as her schedule ran away from her. The empty countryside around her didn't help. It felt isolating, her usual sense of control slipping away. Suddenly, a jarring thud jolted her, and her heart skipped a beat. The unmistakable thump, thump, thump of a flat tire reached her ears. Margaret sighed heavily, pulling the SUV off the narrow country road, dust billowing as her vehicle came to a stop. She opened the door, stepping out into the searing heat, adjusting her scarf against the sun. Inspecting the tire, she found it was completely shredded, rubber strips peeling off like wilted leaves. She straightened, looking down the empty road, and pulled out her phone. There was no signal. Typical, she thought, her lips pressing into a tight line. For a moment she stood there, stranded. Margaret had lived a life of abundance. People were always available to take care of inconveniences like this, assistants, drivers, and roadside service crews. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, she was just another helpless traveler. Her hands rested on her hips as she glanced around. No cars, no people, only the hum of cicadas filling the silence. In her younger days, she might have been more self-sufficient. She thought of a time long ago when she had been stranded on a lonely road like this, long before wealth had insulated her. Back then, the passers-by had ignored her, their indifference etching a memory she could never quite shake. The bitter taste of that day still lingered. She shook her head to dispel the memory and bent down to inspect the tools in the trunk. She had no idea how to use them. A faint sound caught her attention, footsteps crunching on the gravel road behind her. She turned sharply, squinting into the distance. A figure emerged. A boy, no older than 14, walking toward her with a steady stride. He wore a faded t-shirt and scuffed sneakers, his frame thin but sturdy. As he drew closer, his face lit up with a friendly smile. "Hey, ma'am, need some help?" the boy called out, stopping a few steps away from the SUV. His tone was casual, as if stopping to help a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Margaret hesitated, a mixture of relief and uncertainty washing over her. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "My tire, it's flat, and I don't know how to fix it." The boy nodded, stepping closer to inspect the damage. "You got a spare?" he asked, looking at her expectantly. "Yes, I think so," she replied, motioning toward the back of the vehicle. She watched him with a mixture of awe and apprehension as he opened the hatch and pulled out the spare tire and tools. His movements were confident, his demeanor calm. "I can fix it for you," he said, kneeling by the damaged tire. "My dad taught me how. It's not too hard." Margaret stood awkwardly to the side, unsure of what to say or do. "That's very kind of you," she managed, watching as he worked. His hands moved quickly, loosening the lug nuts with precision. She felt a pang of shame. This boy, so young, was more capable in this moment than she was. "So," she ventured, trying to fill the silence, "do you live nearby?" "Yeah, just down the road," he said without looking up. "Not many folks out this way. You're lucky I came along." He grinned, glancing up at her briefly before returning to his task. Lucky indeed, Margaret thought. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, feeling the sun beating down on her. The boy worked steadily, ignoring the heat and the grime. After a while, he stood, brushing dirt off his knees. "All done," he said, stepping back to admire his work. Margaret blinked, almost unable to believe it was over so quickly. She opened her purse, pulling out a crisp $50 bill. "Here," she said, extending it toward him. "For your trouble." The boy shook his head, stepping back. "No thanks," he said firmly. "I didn't do it for money." Margaret stared at him, bewildered. "But surely, you deserve something." He smiled again, that same open, guileless smile. "Just glad I could help," he said, turning to walk away. "Take care, ma'am." She stood there frozen, the bill still clutched in her hand as she watched him disappear down the road. She felt a strange hollowness, an unease she couldn't quite name. The boy had walked away as if nothing had happened, leaving her with more than just a fixed tire. He had left her with questions about herself, her life, and why such a simple act of kindness felt so foreign. Margaret climbed back into the SUV, slipping the money back into her purse. As she drove away, the boy's face lingered in her mind. His clear eyes, his easy smile, the way he had refused her money. It gnawed at her, unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. She arrived late to the luncheon, distracted and out of sorts. Her friends noticed but didn't pry, and Margaret didn't volunteer an explanation. That night, as she lay in bed, the memory of the boy refused to fade. She felt something shifting inside her, something she hadn't felt in years, a need to give, not out of obligation, but out of genuine gratitude. She couldn't let it end there. The next morning, Margaret woke with a determination that surprised even her. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew she had to find the boy and thank him properly. She dressed quickly, trading her usual tailored outfit for something more casual. She climbed into the SUV and drove back to the stretch of road where she had broken down, her heart pounding as she scanned the landscape. It didn't take long to find the small house tucked away from the main road. It was modest, the paint peeling in places, the yard littered with rusted toys. Margaret parked and stepped out, smoothing her scarf as she approached the door. She knocked firmly, her stomach twisting with nerves. After a moment, the door opened and a woman appeared. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in Margaret's polished appearance. "Can I help you?" the woman asked cautiously. Margaret cleared her throat. "I'm looking for a boy. I think he lives here. He helped me with my car yesterday." The woman's expression softened and she nodded. "You mean Elijah. He's my son. Hold on a moment." She turned and called into the house. "Elijah, someone's here to see you." A moment later, Elijah appeared, his face lighting up when he saw Margaret. "Oh, hey, ma'am," he said, stepping forward. "Everything okay with the tire?" "Yes," Margaret said, smiling. "Thanks to you." She hesitated, then added, "I wanted to thank you properly. You wouldn't take any money, but I'd like to do something for you and your family." Elijah looked at her, then back at his mother, who stood silently in the doorway. Finally, he shrugged. "You don't need to do anything, ma'am. We're doing fine." Margaret glanced around, taking in the worn condition of the house, the tired look in the mother's eyes. "I insist," she said gently. "Please, let me help." The mother stepped forward, her gaze cautious but kind. "We've never been ones to ask for charity," she said, "but I can see you mean well." She looked at Elijah, who nodded slightly. "If you really want to help, there are some things around the house that could use fixing." Margaret smiled, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Consider it done. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Margaret hired a contractor to repair the roof, replace broken windows, and fix the plumbing. She visited the house often, overseeing the work and spending time with Elijah and his family. She brought groceries, books for Elijah, and small comforts that made their lives a little easier. For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt truly alive. She had spent years accumulating wealth, attending parties, and making donations that felt impersonal. But this was different. This was real. Elijah's laughter filled the air as he helped the workers carry tools and paintbrushes, his excitement contagious. His mother's gratitude was quiet but profound, her eyes shining with a warmth that Margaret hadn't seen in her own circle of friends. By the time the renovations were complete, the house was almost unrecognizable. The peeling paint was replaced with a fresh coat, the roof no longer leaked, and the windows gleamed in the sunlight. Elijah had his own room, complete with a sturdy desk where he could do his homework. On the final day, as the workers packed up and the sun dipped low in the sky, Margaret stood with Elijah and his mother on the porch. She handed them an envelope, a trust fund she had set up for Elijah's education. "This is for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "so you can follow your dreams." Elijah looked at her, his eyes wide. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Margaret smiled, her heart full. "No," she said softly. "Thank you. You reminded me of what truly matters." As they stood together, watching the sun set over the newly repaired house, Margaret knew that this was just the beginning. She had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a sense of connection, of purpose, and of hope.